The scene is set in a quiet neighborhood where Ben Turner is a police officer who returns home after a long day at work. He notices that his German Shepherd Rex is acting strange and not his usual self. The normal boisterous welcome from Rex when Ben comes home is missing, and instead, Rex hangs back, whines softly, and keeps looking at Ben and his bed. Ben carefully lifted the corner of the blanket. His eyes widened at what he found nestled in the curve of Rex's usual sleeping spot, a tiny orange kitten, no bigger than his hand, curled up and shivering. This was not a typical find in their neighborhood, given the securely fenced backyard. The kitten's fur was still damp, probably from the light rain that had been falling all afternoon. The kitten's eyes were barely open, and it looked thin, too thin. Ben gently scooped up the tiny creature, cradling it against his chest. Rex sat beside him, tail thumping against the floor, as he watched the kitten with obvious concern. The yard had been recently checked, and there was no sign of the kitten. It seemed that Rex must have hidden it under his bed to keep it safe. Ben observed the small kitten, concluding that it was unlikely to have entered on its own, suggesting that Rex must have brought it home from somewhere. He noted that the kitten seemed weak but not injured. Ben tested the kitten with a mixture of warmed milk and an eyedropper, to which the kitten responded readily. This led Ben to wrap the kitten in a soft towel and place it on the couch. Ben decided to take note to ask the neighbors if they were missing a cat or if they had seen any stray animals around. He began to head towards his bedroom, but Rex stood firmly by the kitten, refusing to budge. Ben agreed to let Rex stay with the kitten, but cautioned that they needed to figure out the kitten's origin the following day. Rex settled at the edge of the couch, keeping a watchful eye on the kitten. The next morning, Ben took the kitten to Carter Walsh's mansion to inquire about its possible origin. As he walked up the pathway, the contrast between the mansion and the surrounding homes was notable. The lawn and hedges were immaculately maintained. Upon pressing the doorbell, Carter Walsh answered the door, wearing a silk robe. Ben stood before Officer Turner Carter, who was still in his morning attire despite its early hour. Carter's silver hair was perfectly styled, which was somewhat ironic given the short time he had to get ready. However, his expression quickly turned sour when he spotted Ben, and he managed to make Ben's title sound like a derogatory term. Ben held up the kitten, which he had found the night before, in an attempt to explain his presence at such an early hour. He hoped that perhaps one of the neighbors might be missing the cat. However, Officer Carter barely gave the kitten a glance before his expression suggested that he had already written Ben off. Carter waved his hand in a dismissive manner, saying that he would take care of the situation. Ben was taken aback by Carter's words and gesture, and before he could respond, the officer plucked the kitten from his hands. The grip was too tight, and the kitten let out a frightened mew. Officer Carter turned away, carrying the tiny creature like it was trash that needed to be disposed of. He called out to Ben as he was closing the door in his face, saying, "Have a good day, officer," in a tone that suggested the opposite. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine police work for Carter, but Ben couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling that lingered after their encounter. Ben woke up in the middle of the night to find Rex, his dog, pacing by the door. Rex seemed agitated and was unable to settle down. Ben asked his dog what was wrong, but Rex just stared at him with an expression that seemed to say he knew something Ben didn't. Ben tried to go back to sleep, but Rex's restlessness kept him tossing and turning in bed. Eventually, Ben fell asleep only to be jolted awake again at 3 a.m. This time, he noticed that Rex was no longer by his bed. Ben called out for his dog, but there was no response. Ben's heart racing, he threw off the covers and got out of bed. He quickly realized that the back door was open, and he suspected that Rex might have gotten out. Ben rushed outside to find the cold concrete driveway and scanned the darkness for any sign of his dog. To his relief, he spotted Rex emerging from the shadows. Rex had something in his mouth, and as he got closer, Ben saw that it was another kitten. This one had gray fur instead of orange, but it was just as tiny and fragile as the first one. Rex gently placed the kitten at Ben's feet, and Ben felt a mix of emotions. He was relieved to have found Rex and the kitten, but he was also concerned about how Rex had found the kitten and why he had brought it back home. Ben's eyes locked onto the kitten, and he felt a sense of responsibility wash over him. He knew he had to care for the kitten, but he was also worried about how it would affect his relationship with Rex. Would Rex feel jealous or protective of the new addition to the family? Ben had a lot to consider as he looked at the two animals in front of him, one that he already loved, and the other that was now depending on him. Ben held up the box, and Carter's usual composed facade cracked, revealing a glimpse of irritation. Carter's fingers drummed against the doorframe with an agitated rhythm as he tightened his jaw. Carter stated, "I told you they wander, cats do that." But Ben remained neutral, observing the slight twitch in Carter's right eye. Ben asked, "How many kittens do you have?" But the real question was whether Carter was being truthful about the origin of the kittens. Carter's hesitation lasted only a moment, but it was enough for Ben to sense that there was more to the story. Ben noticed a mixture of calculation, fear, or possibly both on Carter's face as he handed over the box, which contained the kitten. However, Carter only briefly glanced at the kitten before giving it to Ben, suggesting that he might not have been genuinely interested in making sure the kitten was safe. With the kitten in hand, Carter's hand started to shake, which could have been due to either anger or something else. Ben couldn't tell for sure what caused it, but the overall atmosphere did seem tense. Later that night, Ben observed Rex, the German Shepherd, pacing back and forth between the back door and his armchair, whining softly. The tension in the air was palpable, and Ben could feel it affecting him too. Rex, sensing that something was off, decided to take matters into his own hands. At 2 ms, he quietly moved towards the back door and let himself out into the darkness. Ben followed Rex, staying out of sight as they moved down the street to Carter's property. Once they reached the property, Rex effortlessly jumped over the tall fence, and Ben waited patiently for his return. The silence that followed was almost deafening, with what felt like hours passing before Rex reappeared at the fence, this time with another kitten in his mouth. The kitten was white, and Ben's heart was racing with concern as he watched Rex carefully maneuver over the fence to deliver the kitten. This was now the 3rd kitten that Rex had rescued, and it was clear that something was amiss at Carter Walsh's mansion. Ben sat in his dimly lit living room, watching the 3rd kitten sleep peacefully in its makeshift bed. Despite the tension and mystery surrounding the kittens, Ben couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and gratitude towards his faithful and clever dog Rex. Ben carefully placed the white kitten in a carrier and drove to Riverside Animal Hospital. He chose to take the kitten to the hospital instead of going back to Carter's mansion. The waiting room was quiet with just a few early morning patients. There were a few patients in the waiting room at an early hour. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a veterinarian Ben knew from previous cases, examined the kitten thoroughly. Dr. Martinez, who had met Ben before, examined the kitten closely. "She's underweight and slightly dehydrated," she said. The kitten was underweight and slightly dehydrated. Her gentle hands checking the kitten's ears and mouth let me scan for a microchip. Dr. Martinez used her hands to check the kitten's ears and mouth, then scanned for a microchip. The scanner beeped and Dr. Martinez's fingers flew across her keyboard as the information appeared on her screen. The scanner emitted a sound and Dr. Martinez quickly typed on her keyboard. Her friendly expression fell away, replaced by a troubled frown. Dr. Martinez's smile changed to a worried look. "This kitten," she paused, glancing at Ben. Dr. Martinez stopped, looking at Ben. "It's registered to Carter Walsh's address." The kitten was registered to Carter Walsh. Ben leaned forward. "You know something about that place?" Ben leaned forward, asking if Dr. Martinez knew anything about Carter's mansion. Dr. Martinez fidgeted with her stethoscope, clearly uncomfortable. Dr. Martinez played with her stethoscope, indicating she was uncomfortable. "I probably shouldn't say anything. Please," Ben pressed gently. Ben asked Dr. Martinez to continue, showing her that he was interested. "If something's wrong, I need to know." Ben wanted to know if something was wrong with the kitten. She sighed heavily, looking around to ensure they were alone. Dr. Martinez let out a deep breath, checking that no one was listening. "You're not the first person to bring in animals from that address." Dr. Martinez told Ben that he wasn't the first person to bring in animals from Carter's mansion. "We've had a few cases of abandoned or malnourished animals from there." Dr. Martinez said they had seen a few animals from Carter's mansion that were abandoned or malnourished. But no one ever investigated why not. They never found out why the animals were abandoned. "Mr. Walsh has connections. Complaints disappear, records get lost." Dr. Martinez said Mr. Walsh had connections that made it difficult to investigate complaints. She shook her head. "It's frustrating, but what can we do?" Dr. Martinez expressed frustration, but realized there wasn't much they could do. Ben thanked her and left with the kitten. Ben said thank you and left the hospital with the kitten, his mind already forming a plan. Ben was already thinking about what he could do. Ben had planned to install security cameras around his property that afternoon. He purchased 3 high-quality cameras and carefully positioned them to cover various areas, including his backyard, the side of the house, and the street. This installation was a result of the recent strange occurrences on his property. The first sign of trouble was when Ben noticed small objects missing from his backyard. He initially thought it was just a stray animal, but as the events continued, he realized that something more sinister was at play. He found evidence of someone or something lurking in the shadows, which is why he decided to take matters into his own hands and install the security cameras. As night fell, Ben lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above him. His loyal dog, Rex, lay beside him, unusually still but clearly alert. The dog's ears twitched at every sound, and his body was tense, as if waiting for something. Ben reached over and scratched behind Rex's ears, grateful for his loyal partner who had been by his side throughout this ordeal. Ben whispered reassuring words to Rex, "We'll figure this out, boy." Rex's tail thumped once against the bed in response, and his dark eyes fixed on the window, watching and waiting. This sense of unease had been growing for days, and Ben was determined to get to the bottom of it. The next day, Ben settled into his home office chair, eyes fixed on the monitor displaying the feed from his newly installed security cameras. The night vision feature cast everything in an eerie green glow, making the backyard look alien and unfamiliar. He had made sure to lock the dog door tonight, wanting to keep Rex inside until he could figure out what was happening. Rex paced restlessly near the back door, his nails clicking against the hardwood floor every few minutes. Rex's usual calm demeanor had been replaced by an anxious energy that filled the room. The clock on Ben's desk ticked steadily toward 2:30 a.m. Suddenly, Rex's head snapped toward the back door, his entire body going rigid. Through the camera's audio feed, Ben heard it too, a faint, desperate mewing carried on the night wind. The sound was barely audible, but it made Rex whine and scratch at the door. Ben's heart sank as he realized that whatever was happening was more than just a stray animal or a random occurrence. The desperate mewing seemed to be pleading for help, and Ben knew he had to act fast to uncover the truth. Ben's police instincts kicked in as he noticed something was off. He grabbed his jacket and a heavy-duty flashlight from his desk drawer, whispering to Rex to show him what was happening. The moment he opened the back door, Rex darted out into the darkness, with Ben following closely behind, grateful for the dim moonlight that illuminated their way. Rex led them through the quiet neighborhood to Carter's property, stopping at the perfectly manicured hedges that lined the backyard. Ben crouched behind the thick foliage, his heart pounding, as he watched Rex methodically search the area with his nose to the ground. After a few moments, Rex stopped near a cluster of bushes and retrieved a tiny kitten. The kitten was in poor condition, with matted and dirty fur, and struggled to lift its head. When Rex brought the kitten to Ben, it lay limply in his hands, showing little signs of movement. As Ben looked up at Carter's mansion, he noticed it was dark and lifeless, with no signs of activity or anyone searching for the kittens. The silence and stillness of the house were unnerving. Ben whispered to Rex, "Who's going to help these helpless animals?" Rex remained alert, his dark eyes fixed on the silent house as the morning sun cast long shadows across the waiting room of the veterinary clinic. Ben carefully carried the fourth kitten inside, his face etched with worry as the tiny creature hardly moved. Dr. Sarah Martinez seemed troubled by the condition of the severely dehydrated kitten she had just examined. She had found it to be malnourished, and her investigation suggested that this was not the first case of its kind. The kitten's appearance was consistent with an animal that had been confined for a long period of time, desperate to escape. The evidence suggested that it had been subjected to neglect and potential abuse. Ben was visibly upset as he watched the examination of the kitten, and he was determined to confront the person responsible for this situation. The focus of his ire was Carter Walsh, a wealthy individual with a reputation for being untouchable. Ben was convinced that he needed to talk to Carter himself and make him understand the gravity of the situation. As Ben arrived at Carter's mansion, he noticed the gates were open, and Carter himself was waiting on the porch. Despite the early hour, Carter looked well-groomed and at ease. However, Ben could sense a slight tension in his demeanor, which only served to heighten Ben's determination to get to the bottom of the matter. Ben's decision to confront Carter directly was driven by a sense of outrage and a need to protect the vulnerable. He felt that the authorities might not take the situation seriously due to Carter's wealth and influence, and he was determined to make him understand the consequences of his actions. The stakes were high, and Ben was ready to face them head-on. Carter's expression changed as Ben approached, and his lips curled into a cold smirk. He crossed his arms, leaning against a pillar in a clear display of nonchalance, despite the cold glint in his eye. Carter's voice dripped with mockery when he spoke. "I hear you've been poking around, Officer Turner." His words were laced with a subtle threat, though his tone remained even. However, his eyes told a different story, revealing a steely determination beneath his facade. Ben sensed the tension in his muscles, and he knew Carter was aware of it too. Carter's casual demeanor belied a hidden intensity that made Ben's instincts scream caution. Carter took a step forward, his Italian leather shoes clicking on the polished marble, but his stance remained relaxed, exuding an air of calm that was precisely the opposite of how Ben felt. The breeze rustled Carter's suit, but his cold stare never wavered, piercing Ben like a winter chill. "In all my years in this town, I've never had someone quite so persistent in their curiosity," Carter said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Ben stood his ground, refusing to back down despite the overwhelming urge to do so. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across Carter's face, accentuating his skeletal features in a way that sent shivers down Ben's spine. Sweat trickled down Ben's back, but he suppressed any sign of discomfort or fear, keeping his expression even. His hand rested near his belt, a habit born of years of experience dealing with unpredictable situations. Carter's lips twisted into a mixture of a smile and a sneer, and he adjusted his silk tie in a gesture that seemed more menacing than nervous. The diamond pin at his throat caught the sunlight, casting tiny rainbows against the porch ceiling. Carter's words hung in the air like a challenge. "People like me don't waste time on strays. You should mind your own business." Ben felt anger rising within him, but he kept his response measured. The tension between them was palpable, a living, breathing entity that seemed to pulse with an energy all its own. Carter's words were a clear threat, and Ben knew he had to tread carefully to avoid escalating the situation further. Ben sat in his dim home office, surrounded by the quiet of the night. He had been reviewing the footage from his hidden camera for hours, and at just past midnight, something caught his eye. A black luxury SUV had crept along the tree line behind Carter's property, its headlights off. The vehicle stopped, and a figure emerged carrying a cardboard box. The moonlight briefly illuminated the person's expensive watch as they moved. Ben watched as the person disappeared into the woods, only to return minutes later empty-handed. The timestamp on the footage showed 12:17 as and when Rex made his escape through the yard, following the exact same path into the darkness. Ben's jaw tightened as he paused the footage. The truth hit him like a physical blow. His fingers gripped the edge of his desk until his knuckles turned white. Carter wasn't losing the kittens. He was deliberately dumping them in the woods to die. Ben checked his equipment one last time, ensuring everything was in order. He was ready to take action, and his service weapons were secure. The memory of the last kitten Rex had found, barely breathing and covered in mud, fueled his determination. He was ready to put an end to Carter's cruel actions. Ben carefully prepared himself for the night ahead, equipping his flashlight with fresh batteries and his camera, feeling the weight of his badge in his pocket as a reminder of his responsibility. He put on a dark jacket, the chill of the night air biting through it, and headed out into the quiet streets, his eyes scanning the neighborhood for any sign of activity. He stopped in front of his house to give his dog, Rex, a quick scratch behind the ears, instructing him to stay put before continuing on his way. From a safe distance behind a cluster of bushes, Ben watched Carter's property, his eyes fixed on the backyard and the path leading to the woods. As the clock struck 12:30 a.m., he settled in, controlling his breathing and waiting for any sign of movement. The night was still, with only the occasional rustle of leaves or distant car breaking the silence. Just after 1:45 a.m., a pair of headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a black SUV as it slowly made its way down the street, its lights dimmed to avoid detection. Ben's heart rate picked up as he recognized the vehicle from previous night's footage. A figure emerged from the SUV, wearing a dark hoodie that obscured their face, carrying a cardboard box in their arms. The faint mewing sounds coming from inside the box made Ben's grip on his camera steady, and he began to record every detail. The figure moved purposefully towards the woods, not noticing Ben's concealed position. He waited until they passed by, then continued to observe, his eyes fixed on the box and the person carrying it. The figure carefully placed each foot on the ground to avoid making noise in order to remain stealthy. As moonlight filtered through the trees, the figure came to a stop in a small clearing, set down a box, and gently lifted the lid, releasing the weak cries of kittens into the night air. Ben drew his weapon and called out, cutting through the darkness with his voice. His words echoed through the silence, and the figure froze for a moment. Slowly, the figure turned around, and as they did, the hood fell back, revealing a woman's face, that of a housekeeper. Her eyes were wide with fear, her hands trembling as she raised them. Ben's stomach dropped as he took in the situation, which was quite different from what he had anticipated. The woman, Maria, stood before him, her face pale in the moonlight, her silver-streaked hair and worn hands a testament to her age. Her expression was one of raw fear, rather than guilt, which Ben found puzzling. Despite his police training, he couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for her. Maria's voice trembled as she begged, "Please." She introduced herself as she stood there, her eyes pleading. Ben replied, keeping his voice steady, "I'm Ben." Maria's nervous glances towards Carter's mansion revealed her fear. Ben asked her about the kittens, and she explained that Mr. Walsh had ordered her to get rid of them. According to Maria, the kittens were making too much noise and were considered a nuisance. Ben pulled out his phone and began recording Maria's explanation, telling her to tell him everything. Maria's shoulders sagged under the weight of her confession, and tears welled up in her eyes. Her voice cracked as she spoke, revealing the distress she was in. Maria's situation was complex, and she struggled with the moral implications of her actions. As she bred cats for a show, She was only keeping the perfect ones and discarding the rest, which was inhumane. Her partner, Mr. Walsh, would pay for her son's tuition only if she followed his orders to dispose of the imperfect kittens. Despite being instructed to drown them, Maria found it unbearable and brought the kittens to a safe location, hoping someone would find them. Ben discovered that Maria's actions were not as random as they seemed. In reality, she was racing against time to save kittens from suffering a cruel fate, either from exposure or predators. Her desperation was exploited by Mr. Walsh, who used it to force her into doing his dirty work. Ben saw both a perpetrator and a victim in Maria, and the law was clear that animal abandonment was not acceptable. Ben decided not to arrest Maria, but instead asked for her help in taking down Mr. Walsh, the real criminal. Maria agreed to help, and Ben guided her to his house, where Rex, the German Shepherd, had been caring for the rescued kittens. As they entered, the kittens were peacefully sleeping, and Rex remained vigilant, watching over them. Maria was overcome with emotion, and tears streamed down her face due to the sight of the kittens and the realization of her situation. Maria's actions were driven by desperation and a desire to protect the kittens from suffering. She was torn between her desire to provide for her son and her inability to carry out Mr. Walsh's orders to harm the kittens. Ben saw through the situation and chose to help Maria rather than punishing her for her actions. The scene unfolded as Maria and Ben worked together to take down Mr. Walsh and bring an end to his cruel treatment of the kittens. The situation highlighted the complexities of human nature and the importance of compassion and empathy in difficult situations. She knelt beside Rex, who watched her with a mixture of interest and gentle eyes, as she gazed at the tiny creatures nestled safely in W's warm fur. Their little paws twitched occasionally in their sleep. She whispered, her voice catching, "Oh, they're alive." She had prayed for someone to find them, but she never thought it would happen. They were in a desperate situation, left to fend for themselves, but thanks to W, they've been saved. Maria pulled up a chair, its legs scraping quietly against the linoleum floor as she spoke. "I need to know everything. What else is Carter hiding?" She dabbed at her eyes with her sleeve, her hands shaking slightly. Maria revealed that there was more in the basement, a litter of 6 kittens whose mother didn't meet Carter's standards for breeding. She swallowed hard at the memory, her face paling. Carter was waiting until Saturday to dispose of them, saying it's easier to get rid of them all at once. The thought of treating them as nothing but trash made Ben's jaw tighten, and a muscle worked beneath his skin. Ben needed something concrete to use against Carter, something that would prove his wrongdoing. He asked for photos, documents, or any other evidence that could be used to expose Carter's actions. Maria mentioned that the basement was always locked, making it difficult to get in without getting caught. Maria suggested leaving the back door unlocked the next night, and Ben could then enter the house using the security system's code, which he knew. However, Maria was hesitant because Carter might find out, putting her own safety at risk. Ben urged Maria to be cautious and put her safety first, but Maria showed determination. Despite her fear, she was willing to help the kittens, and they deserved a chance to live. Ben is determined to put an end to Carter's cruel activities by documenting everything on a body camera, which can be used as evidence in court. He plans to have Officer Rodriguez nearby, ready to intervene at the first sign of trouble, and Rex acting as his backup, using his skills to detect any potential danger. With a clear plan in place, Ben feels more at ease as he leaves with Maria, who has given him detailed instructions and her private number. As Ben sits beside Rex and the sleeping kittens, he expresses his determination to stop Carter and bring an end to his cruel actions. The night ahead of him is filled with uncertainty, but he is resolute in his mission. With Rex by his side, Ben approaches Carter's mansion, a large and imposing house that seems to loom over him in the darkness. Upon reaching the back door, Ben's heart begins to pound as he steps inside, his body tense and alert. The mansion's interior is eerily quiet, filled with expensive and luxurious furniture that cast strange shadows in the darkness. However, beneath the silence, Ben notices the faint sound of mewing coming from below, a sound that fills him with a sense of purpose and determination to uncover the truth. As Ben descended the wooden stairs, his small flashlight cast a faint glow through the darkness, allowing him to locate the basement door. Each step was carefully placed, testing for any potential crevices or gaps in the stairs before he applied his full weight to them. The meowing grew louder and more distinct, and the air in the basement hit him like a heavy wave of despair, damp, cold, and weighed down by the smell of neglect. His flashlight beam caught on something metallic in the corner, a cage where 6 tiny kittens huddled together, their fur matted and dirty, barely moving due to hunger and cold. Ben's stomach turned as he approached the cage. His body camera recorded everything as he swept the flashlight around the space, documenting the kitten's condition. The light then fell on something that made his blood run cold. A large porcelain bathtub, pristine white and standing against the wall, with folded towels beside it and a 5-gallon bucket filled with water. The implications were crystal clear. These were tools for drowning the kittens. Ben's jaw clenched in anger as he carefully photographed everything with his body camera, capturing evidence of Carter's cruel intentions. However, a sudden creak from above froze him in place. Footsteps were moving across the floor above his head, and Ben quickly killed his flashlight, pressing himself behind a tall storage shelf. His heart was pounding so hard that he feared it might give him away. His hand instinctively moved to his service weapon, gripping it firmly as he waited for what was to come. The basement door opened, spilling yellow light down the stairs, and Carter's familiar whistle echoed through the space, casual and almost cheerful. Carter's footsteps descended the stairs. Ben held his breath, pressing against the cold shelf with his gun ready as he watched Carter approach the cage in the dimly lit basement. Carter's whistling grew louder, unaware that he wasn't alone, and the final confrontation was moments away. Each step he took echoed through the space, the sound of his expensive loafers clicking against the concrete floor. As he reached into the cage with his manicured hands, a tiny kitten let out a weak cry of protest as Carter grabbed it by the scruff of its neck. Ben emerged from behind the shelf, his service weapon steady in his hands, pointed directly at Carter's chest. "Put it down, Carter," he said firmly. Carter paused for a moment, the kitten dangling from his grip, before breaking into an amused smile and letting out a low chuckle. He seemed to find the situation amusing, and his smug expression didn't waver even as he caught sight of the camera. "Wow, this is dramatic," he said, his smile growing wider. "You should be thanking me, Officer Turner," he said, gesturing casually with his free hand. "No shelter wants them. No one cares. I'm just saving time." The camera's red light blinked steadily in the darkness, and Ben could sense that his partner, Officer Riley, was listening back at the station, recording everything. Ben's thumb moved deliberately to activate the audio feed, making sure that every detail of the confrontation was captured for evidence. Carter's eyes flickered to the camera, but he didn't seem to care, his confident smile unwavering as he stood there, holding the tiny kitten by the scruff of its neck. Ben struggled to maintain control of his emotions, his muscles tensed with rage as he considered attacking Carter. His grip on the gun tightened as he fought to keep his anger in check. Carter's smirk remained, but his eyes narrowed slightly as he took a deliberate step forward, still holding onto the kitten. The dim light in the basement cast a shadow on Carter's expensive suit, making him appear even more menacing. His smirk turned from confident to challenging. A low, menacing growl echoed through the basement, causing Carter's head to snap towards the sound. Rex, a German shepherd, emerged from the shadows, his powerful body moving with deadly precision. The dog positioned himself between Carter and the cage of kittens, his muscles tensed and ready to spring into action. For the first time, Carter's smug expression faltered, as the sight of Rex's gleaming teeth and fierce protective stance finally pierced his shield of arrogance. Ben's grip on the gun tightened, his voice dropping to a whisper as he growled a warning. The tension in the basement crackled with electricity, Ben's gun remaining steady as his eyes locked onto Carter, who still held the helpless kitten. Rex's low growl echoed off the concrete walls, a clear warning to Carter to back down. A strong barrier obstructed the way to other animals that were trapped. Carter's expression contorted into an odd blend of disbelief and cold. Amusement. A formidable barrier stood in the way of the other animals that were also trapped. Carter's expression contorted into an unusual blend of disbelief and cold amusement as he shifted his gaze back and forth between Ben and Rex, seemingly struggling to comprehend that this situation was unfolding right in his own basement. "You really think you can arrest me over a few stray kittens?" Carter scoffed, his tone dripping with contempt, but an underlying hint. With a sense of finality, it was clear that Carter's time was up. Moments later, responding officers entered the mansion, guiding Carter through the grand entrance filled with exquisite artwork and immaculate furnishings. Although his expression remained emotionless, a flicker of intense anger was visible. With a sense of finality, he was finished. Moments later, responding officers entered the lavish mansion, leading Carter out through the grand entrance hall filled with his luxurious artwork and immaculate furnishings. Although his expression remained emotionless, a simmering anger was evident in his eyes as he was escorted toward the waiting police vehicle. Inside, Rex, Ben's loyal dog, gently nudged one of the rescued kittens with his nose to check on it. Crouching down next to his devoted companion, Ben placed a reassuring hand on Rex's neck and murmured, "Good boy, Rex, we got him." A few hours later, Ben stood behind a two-way mirror observing Carter in the interrogation room. Despite being in custody, Carter maintained a relaxed demeanor, appearing almost uninterested as he conversed quietly with his expensive lawyer. Through the glass, Ben could catch snippets of conversations involving arranged phone calls and names of powerful individuals being mentioned. Officer Riley joined Ben, holding a cup of coffee. "The charges are solid: animal abuse, neglect, and illegal dumping. We have him dead to rights with the evidence," he remarked, though there was a hint of doubt in his voice. Riley sighed after taking a sip of his drink. His lawyers are already pushing for bail. They're top-notch, really good, charging more per hour than we earn in a month. Individuals like him are tough to bring down, Riley said with a serious expression. He continued, "They have connections beyond our reach." Ben nodded, his jaw clenched, aware that Riley was correct, but the mental image of those defenseless kittens kept him determined. "Let them try." We followed proper procedures. Later that day, Ben went to the local animal shelter where most of the rescued kittens were being housed temporarily. The shelter manager, a compassionate individual, greeted him. A woman named Sarah guided him to their enclosure, where the tiny creatures were already showing signs of improvement. Their eyes appeared brighter and their movements more lively, with the exception of one. This particular creature was the smallest bunny that Rex had refused to abandon at Carter's mansion. The fragile kitten was currently at Ben's residence, where Rex maintained a constant watch over it. There was something about its resilience, despite its frailty, that had resonated with both Ben and Rex. That morning, Ben decided to name her Hope, as he observed Rex curling protectively around the little ball of fur. As night fell, Ben concluded his shift and made his way home. The streets were unusually quiet, with most individuals having already settled for the evening. While contemplating Hope and Rex, he noticed something unusual in his rearview mirror, a black SUV that resembled the one from Carter's property. Initially, he tried to brush it off as mere coincidence, but after making 3 turns, he realized the vehicle remained consistently behind him. Instincts honed from his police training kicked in, causing his grip on the steering wheel to tighten. He intentionally turned onto Cedar Street, selecting a route that would divert him away from his house and lead him onto less frequented roads. To his dismay, the SUV continued to trail him closely. His heart raced as he navigated onto an isolated stretch of road, the SUV's headlights remaining visible in his mirrors. It became increasingly clear that he was indeed being pursued. Although Carter was in custody, it was evident that his influence extended far beyond the confines of his jail cell. Ben's knuckles grew pale against the steering wheel as he watched the SUV draw nearer in his rearview mirror. In a moment of decision, he abruptly pulled his car over onto the empty roadside, gravel crunching beneath his tires, leaving the black SUV no option but to follow suit. The vehicle stopped behind him, its headlights creating elongated shadows in the dark night. Ben's heart raced, yet he maintained a calm demeanor as he exited his car. One hand rested on his service weapon, emphasizing the seriousness of the moment. The night air felt sharp and still, with no other traffic on this isolated stretch of road. Standing firm, he focused intently on the SUV, where he could discern a lone figure sitting in the driver's seat. However, the driver showed no intention of getting out of the vehicle. After several tense moments of silence, the driver's window slid down slightly, just enough for a voice to project towards him. "You're making enemies, Officer Turner," the voice came through, icy and professional, carrying an unmistakable warning. Ben took a resolute step closer, prepared to reply. But before he could utter a word, the SUV's engine erupted into life. The tires screeched against the asphalt as the vehicle accelerated away, leaving Ben standing there amidst a cloud of exhaust fumes and dust from the road. In that fleeting moment, his trained eye managed to catch a glimpse of a partial license plate number, just before the SUV rounded a bend and vanished from sight. Latter's vehicle came to a halt behind him, its headlights creating elongated shadows that danced in the darkness. Ben could feel his heart racing, yet he remained composed as he stepped out of his car, one hand resting on his service weapon. The night air was cool and quiet, with no other traffic disturbing this isolated stretch of road. Standing firm, Ben focused intently on the SUV, where, despite the lack of light, he could discern a single person behind the wheel. However, that individual showed no intention of getting out. After a few moments filled with tension, the driver's window opened just enough for a voice to reach him. "You're making enemies, Officer Turner." The tone was icy and professional, laced with an unmistakable threat. Ben moved forward with determination, but before he could say anything, the SUV's engine roared to life, and the tires screeched against the asphalt as it took off, leaving Ben surrounded by a cloud of exhaust and dust from the road. His trained eye quickly noted a partial license plate number, just before the SUV turned a corner and vanished from view. Back at the precinct, Ben sat at his desk, frustration apparent in the tightness of his shoulders as he awaited the results of the plate trace. Officer Riley approached him, holding a printout, his expression serious. "We got a hit on that plate," Riley announced, placing the paper on Ben's desk. "It's a rental car registered to a company called Riverside Holdings, LLC. I did some research, and it's a shell corporation. Guess who it connects to? Carter's legal team." Ben growled softly as he scanned the document. Riley leaned against the desk, dropping his voice to a near whisper. "Listen, Ben, this isn't just about the Kittens anymore. He wants you to back off. These people play dirty." Ben's jaw tightened as he continued to examine the information. The paper crumpled in his grip as his fists tightened. The very idea of conceding defeat and allowing Carter to triumph ignited a fierce anger within him. Images of those innocent kittens, trapped and on the brink of drowning in that basement, raced through his thoughts. He realized that retreat was simply not an option for him. When Ben finally returned home, he found the house unusually quiet, save for the gentle purring emanating from Rex's bed. His devoted companion Rex lay cozily curled around the fragile kitten named Hope, who nestled securely against Rex's warm fur. This heartwarming scene, the formidable police dog safeguarding the delicate kitten, drew clarity to Ben's muddled thoughts. Ben took a seat next to them, gently stroking Rex's soft fur. The dog lifted his gaze, eyes filled with understanding, as if acutely aware of the gravity of their circumstances. "Looks like we have a significant battle ahead of us, buddy," Ben murmured softly, observing how hope instinctively burrowed closer into Rex's protective warmth. Meanwhile, the precinct bustled with its typical morning energy when Maria rushed through the entrance, her face drained of color and hands shaking. Ben immediately recognized her distress. She appeared as though she hadn't had a decent night's sleep, her usually tidy appearance now in disarray. "Officer Turner," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I need to talk to you about Carter." Ben guided her toward a secluded interview room, shutting the door gently behind them. Maria sank heavily into a chair, her hands twisting anxiously. "I want to testify against him," she confessed, "but I'm terrified. You can't imagine what he's capable of." Ben reassured her, saying, "You're safe here," but Maria shook her head in denial. "No one is truly safe from him," she insisted. Then she retrieved a small flash drive from her purse. "I found this while cleaning his study last week. I made a copy." As Ben plugged in the device, his heart raced with anticipation. As Ben accessed his computer, the first file he opened was a security video from many years ago. The footage depicted Carter in his office, aggressively confronting a younger employee, identifiable by his uniform. Carter's expression was one of intense anger as he forcefully grabbed the man's collar and pushed him against the wall. Subsequently, more videos appeared on the screen, revealing additional confrontations and escalating violence. Following, Ben booted up his computer and noticed that the first file that popped up was a security video from years ago. The footage depicted Carter aggressively confronting a younger male employee, identifiable by his uniform. Carter's expression was one of fury as he seized the man's collar and forcefully pushed him against the wall. Following this, Ben uncovered more videos showcasing additional confrontations and instances of violence. Soon after, he stumbled upon files containing spreadsheets, emails, and bank transactions that indicated a pattern of systematic bribery aimed at suppressing complaints and silencing witnesses. Maria disclosed, her voice quivering with emotion, that this pattern had been occurring for years. She emphasized that the abuse towards. Feeling the weight of exhaustion, both mentally and physically, he cast a glance toward Rex's bed. There, nestled comfortably in the soft fur of the German Shepherd, was Hope, the small kitten they had rescued. Since her arrival, Rex had remained steadfast in his protective role. Seeking some clarity for his foggy thoughts, Ben poured himself a strong cup of coffee, hoping that the caffeine would provide a much-needed boost. As steam wafted from the mug, his phone vibrated on the counter, causing him to halt mid-sip. A startling headline caught his attention: prominent businessman Carter Walsh exposed in shocking video leak. The accompanying clips from security footage were quickly circulating on social media, showing Carter's furious outburst as he assaulted an employee. Alongside this disturbing visual, documents revealing years of bribery and cover-ups filled the comment section. A small grin appeared on Ben's face. Lily Brooks had successfully executed the plan he had envisioned. She had made the scandal impossible to overlook or dismiss. Carter's meticulously crafted public persona was disintegrating by the second. However, his moment of triumph was fleeting. As he continued to skim through the public's outraged comments, the lights flickered and then went out entirely, plunging the house into an unsettling stillness that was only interrupted by Rex's low growl. The dog was tense, standing guard at the front door with his hackles raised. Hope let out a soft mewl from her cozy spot on the bed. 50 to 45. The toll of the day had left him feeling utterly fatigued both mentally and physically. He took a moment to look over at Rex's bed, where Hope, the small kitten they had rescued, was cozily nestled into the warm fur of the German Shepherd. Since bringing her home, Rex had remained steadfast in his protective demeanor. Ben decided to pour himself a strong cup of coffee, hoping that the caffeine would help to clear the mental haze clouding his thoughts. As steam rose from the mug, his phone suddenly buzzed on the counter. The notification caught his attention and made him pause mid-sip. The headline blared across his screen: "Prominent businessman Carter Walsh exposed in shocking video leak." Beneath it, clips from security footage were rapidly circulating on social media, showing Carter's face contorted with anger as he assaulted an employee. This video looped continuously, while comments flooded in revealing documents that detailed years of bribery and cover-ups. A faint smile crept onto Ben's face, knowing that Lily Brooks had accomplished precisely what he'd hoped for. She had made this story too significant to be ignored or buried. Carter's meticulously maintained public reputation was disintegrating by the second. However, his moment of joy was fleeting. Just as he began to read through the outraged comments from the public, the lights suddenly flickered and went out, plunging the house into an unsettling silence. The only sound breaking the quiet was Rex's low growl. The dog stood tense and alert, facing the front door with his hackles raised, while Hope softly mewed from her place on the bed. Despite the commotion, Rex remained in his defensive stance. Instinctively, Ben's police training kicked in. He set down his coffee and retrieved his service weapon from its lockbox, moving stealthily through. As the morning sun illuminated the scene, it became clear just how serious the situation was. All 4 tires of his police cruiser had been slashed, with the rubber completely destroyed. A white piece of paper was flapping under one of the windshield wipers, and Ben's jaw tightened as he cautiously approached the vehicle, keeping a watchful eye on his surroundings. The note was inscribed in tidy block letters and read, "You should have walked away." Taking a slow, measured breath to steady himself, he gripped his weapon more firmly while scanning the quiet street for any potential threats. Inside, Rex's growl reverberated through the open door, serving as a reminder that danger still loomed. Later, as Ben drove into the precinct parking lot, he noted the lengthening shadows cast by the evening light. He was forced to make do with a borrowed patrol car due to the slashed tires on his own vehicle. His jaw remained tense, and he kept the threatening note from earlier secured in an evidence bag next to him. The station buzzed with its usual routine as he headed to his desk to collect the necessary paperwork to document Carter's escalating threats. Just as he began typing, the radio crackled urgently as the morning sun illuminated the scene. It became clear just how serious the situation was. Every tire on his police cruiser had been deliberately slashed, with pieces of rubber scattered everywhere. A white piece of paper danced in the breeze, caught under one of the windshield wipers. Clenching his jaw, he approached the vehicle with caution, meticulously scanning the area around him for any signs of trouble. The note, written in tidy block letters, read, "You should have walked away." Taking a deep, controlled breath, he tightened his grip on his firearm as he surveyed the eerily quiet street. Inside the car, Rex's growl resonated, serving as a reminder that danger still lingered nearby, while the evening shadows stretched long across the precinct parking lot. Upon arriving at the station, Ben was forced to park his personal vehicle due to the slashed tires, opting instead for a borrowed patrol car. His jaw remained tense, and he carefully kept the threatening note from earlier safely stored in an evidence bag next to him. As he entered the station, the usual hum of activity surrounded him. He made his way to his desk to gather the necessary paperwork to document the escalating threats posed by Carter. However, he had barely begun typing when the radio suddenly came alive with a call for all units regarding a structure fire at 1247 Maple Street, suspected to be arson. Ben's fingers froze above the keyboard as the address registered in his mind. 1247 Maple Street was Maria's residence. His heart raced as he snatched his keys and hurried out, nearly colliding with Officer Riley in his frantic rush. The evening traffic cleared a path for his flashing lights and sirens, and smoke could be seen rising into the sky from several blocks away, a dark plume against the twilight backdrop. When Ben arrived outside Maria's apartment building, flames were already spilling out of the second-floor windows, with firefighters actively combating the inferno while paramedics. Maria lay on a stretcher, her face covered by an oxygen mask. Her normally tidy gray hair was now messy and stained with soot. As Ben hurried to her side, he could hear the crunching sound of broken glass and debris beneath his boots. When Maria noticed him, her eyes grew wide, and she weakly pushed the Maria lay on a stretcher, her face obscured by an oxygen mask that hindered her breathing. Her normally tidy gray hair was now a tangled mess, marked with soot from the fire. As Ben hurried to her side, he stepped carefully over shards of broken glass and debris scattered across the ground. When Maria spotted him, her eyes widened in recognition, and she weakly pulled the mask down from her face. "Officer Turner," she gasped, her fingers trembling as they clutched his wrist. It was truly him. Her voice, strained and hoarse from smoke inhalation, revealed her struggle. She knew he was aware of her assistance to him. A paramedic attempted to adjust the oxygen mask back into place, but Maria resisted for just a little while longer. There had been a warning sign before the chaos erupted, a phone call followed by thick smoke engulfing the area. Ben gently squeezed her hand to comfort her while the paramedic successfully secured the mask back on her face. He stepped back, allowing them. 56 to 43. She guided her inside where 2 police officers were waiting. "These men are my friends, and they will keep an eye on things around the clock," he assured her. Maria weakly nodded, her gaze unfocused. "Thank you, Officer Turner." As Ben drove home, a nagging feeling about the situation lingered. Ben guided Maria into the room where 2 police officers were stationed, reassuring her by saying that these officers were his friends and would provide round-the-clock protection. Maria responded with a faint nod, her gaze distant and unfocused. She thanked Officer Turner, but Ben felt an unsettling feeling. As Ben moved through the darkness, he was aware of Rex's barking, which seemed to guide him through the shadows. This situation felt too orchestrated to be mere coincidence. The timing was impeccable, and the way the figure maneuvered suggested a well-practiced. It became clear that they were no longer just observing. This was a reconnaissance operation, indicating that someone was strategizing their next steps. Rex navigated the obscured area like a ghost, showcasing his extensive training with each quiet movement. His nose remained close to the ground as he tracked the scent of the intruder. As Ben moved through the darkness, he followed Rex's barking, which echoed wildly around him. This wasn't just an ordinary prowler. The situation felt calculated and deliberate. The timing seemed too coincidental, and the escape was far too smooth to suggest they were merely lurking. They were conducting reconnaissance, likely planning their next steps carefully. Rex, the German Shepherd, moved stealthily like a ghost, demonstrating his extensive training with every silent step he took. His nose was close to the ground, tracking the scent of the intruder as they navigated the thick brush behind Ben's home. The dog's muscles were taut, reflecting his readiness to pounce at any moment. Ben stayed close behind, using his flashlight to pierce through the murky shadows cast by the trees. He breathed steadily, his breaths measured as he maneuvered over the uneven ground, placing complete trust in Rex's instincts. Ahead, a figure flitted between the trees, but Rex was quickly reducing the distance separating them. Years of canine pursuit training came into play as, in a mocking tone, Davidson sneered at Ben, clearly feeling self-satisfied despite being in custody. "You really have no idea what you've gotten into, do you?" he said, his voice laced with disdain. However, Ben chose to disregard the insult and proceeded to put handcuffs on Davidson, fastening them securely around his wrists. Rex, the loyal dog, remained vigilant, holding his position until Ben signaled him to let go. As Ben reached for his radio to request backup, he communicated their location in the woods. While performing a routine search of Davidson's pockets, Ben's fingers grazed something unusual, a folded piece of paper. Upon extracting it, a chill ran down his spine as he realized it was an intricate map of his own house. The map appeared to have been crafted from meticulous observation. The back door was circled in red, accompanied by ominous scrawled letters proclaiming, "Do it tonight." Ben's heart raced in response to the clear threat embedded in the message. This was more than just an attempt to intimidate him. It was a calculated plan. Carter was no longer merely trying to frighten Ben away. He intended to invade his home. As the weight of Carter's intentions settled upon him, the atmosphere of the night transformed, feeling colder and darker, revealing the true seriousness of the situation. Later, Ben walked restlessly in his living room, the wooden floorboards creaking under his deliberate movements. He felt the weight of his phone as he anxiously anticipated updates regarding Davidson's interrogation. The security guard had become tight-lipped as soon as they brought him in, and now Carter's high-priced attorneys were already working to secure his release. Rex, stationed near the window, observed Ben closely, unable to remain still. The dog's ears perked up at every small noise outside, his body tense and alert, reflecting the anxiety that hung in the air. As the clock ticked on, a small kitten was nestled in its bed, completely unaware of the underlying tension enveloping the house. After another hour of anxious waiting, Ben decided to grab his keys and head to the police station. Upon arrival, he found Officer Riley sitting at his desk. He looked worn out yet resolute. "Check this out," Ben said, spreading out the map they had discovered linked to Davidson Carter. "They aren't just trying to scare me anymore. This is a deliberate break-in." Riley examined the map, his face turning serious. "The timing here isn't a coincidence. His bail hearing is coming up, and even with all the evidence we possess, his lawyers are throwing every obstacle in our way," he replied. "They're just stalling for time," Ben said, running his fingers through his hair in frustration. Suddenly, his phone buzzed in his pocket, and an unfamiliar number lit up the screen. A jolt of unease shot through Ben as he read the ominous message. "Walk away, Officer Turner, or next time it won't just be your tires." He quickly shared the text with Riley, who immediately began the process of tracing the source of the message. Although both were aware that it would likely lead to a dead end, Carter was intelligent enough not to leave any clear tracks. The drive home felt unusually prolonged, with Ben frequently glancing into his rearview mirror. As he finally pulled into his driveway, Rex, his loyal dog, met him at the door with an unsettling demeanor. The dog's fur was bristled, and a low growl emanated from his throat, fixating on the front door. Ben swiftly accessed the security camera footage on his phone and saw a dark sedan parked 3 houses down. Its engine was off, but it was evidently occupied, lurking and observing. He stood by the window, gazing at the vehicle shrouded in darkness, realizing that Carter was attempting to instill fear, demonstrating that he was always within reach. Yet, as Ben observed Rex standing guard, fiercely protective and unyielding, he felt a surge of determination rise within him. 1 hour 4 minutes and 35 seconds. Although Carter possessed significant wealth and influence, Ben held an even more potent weapon, the truth and a fierce resolve to ensure that justice prevailed. As night fell, an oppressive darkness enveloped Ben's home, infiltrating every nook and cranny. He navigated through the house with meticulous care, systematically switching off lights until only a dim glow from the street lamps illuminated the space, casting elongated shadows across the walls. To the casual observer outside, it would seem as if he had retired for the night, just another tranquil evening in a suburban neighborhood. 1 hour 5 minutes and 11 seconds. However, Ben was far from sleepy. His senses were heightened, fully alert and on edge. He positioned Rex by the back door, relying on his loyal companion's sharp instincts to sense any potential threat before it could manifest. The German Shepherd remained motionless on the cool tile, Yet his gaze was fixed intently on the door, demonstrating unwavering vigilance. His black nose occasionally twitched as he took in the scents wafting through the night. Meanwhile, Ben settled into the shadows of the living room, his service weapon poised and steady in his hand, even as anxiety coursed through him. 1 hour 5 minutes and 50 seconds. The house emitted soft creaks and groans as time slipped by, marked by the rhythmic ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Rex's ears pricked up at every sound a passing car, the rustling of leaves, the faint whirring of the refrigerator. But his training kept him composed and silent, a steadfast protector in the dark. At precisely 2:30 a.m., a subtle scratching noise reached Ben's ears, exactly as he had anticipated, the sound of metal scraping against metal, indicating that someone was attempting to pick the lock with skillful precision. In response, Ben's grip on his Carter may possess wealth and influence, but Ben had a more formidable asset, the truth, coupled with an unwavering commitment to ensure that justice would be served. As night enveloped Ben's home, it settled in like a dense blanket, the darkness penetrating every nook and cranny. He navigated through the rooms with deliberate care, systematically turning off lights until only the dim illumination from streetlights filtered through the windows, creating elongated shadows on the walls. To an observer outside, it might have seemed as if he had retired for the night, just another serene evening in a suburban neighborhood. However, Ben was very much awake, every nerve ending fully alert. He positioned Rex by the back door, relying on his loyal companion's sharp instincts to sense any potential threats before they could materialize. The German Shepherd lay motionless on the cool tile floor, yet his eyes remained sharply focused on the door, displaying unwavering attention. Occasionally, his black nose would twitch as he sampled the scents of the night. Ben took his place in the living room shadows, his service weapon at the ready, his hand steady despite the tension surging through him. The house creaked and shifted around them as time passed, marked by the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Rex's ears perked up at every sound, the distant hum of a car, the rustling of leaves, the subtle buzz of the refrigerator, but his training kept him quiet and composed, a vigilant protector in the dark. Then, at 2:30 a.m., a faint scratching noise reached Ben's ears, exactly as he had expected. It was the unmistakable sound of metal scraping. The scratching persisted for several seconds, methodical and practiced, until a faint click indicated success. The door began to open slowly, its hinges creaking in the stillness. Despite the intruder's cautious movements, a beam of moonlight sliced across the kitchen floor like a silver,